John, good morning. Nice to see
Morning.
you.
You too, James. Good to catch up with all this.
Exactly. So I've been really looking forward to having this chat with you. I'm keen to really understand a bit about your journey, because obviously you're an experienced seller.
Old.
By way of So by way of introduction, Slingshot Edge, innovative, renowned sales training company. I know you pulled away from the world of sales about 5 years ago to set this up, one of the co-founders. And I know you help people globally to improve in their selling technique. So prior to that, very successful career, working in software, some really exciting brands, Lockheed Martin.
Yeah.
Now Leidos, we got that right?
Leidos or Leidos.
Axial Systems, Capita, and I'm taking you way back now. I'm going way back. But I know you've always led teams, you've worked globally, so you're a man who's got a lot of experience, and I wanted to bring you into the conversation to help sellers out there really learn from some of the things that you found along the way. So why don't you kick us off? The market at the minute, certainly our tech recruitment market, it's a bit rocky. The waters are a bit choppy. How are you seeing the market right now?
Yeah, I think you're right. Just to go back just to one of your points. So I didn't co-found Slingshot. I don't know if that's that important. Callum, my business partner, co-founded it and brought me in after courting me for many years to come and join him.
Good disclaimer save. Call off the lawyers.
But yeah, I'll be there for 5 years. I think the market it's tougher. You know, it's obviously tougher. There's economic uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty around the world right now. There's a lot of bad things happening as well, and people are understandably cautious. Budgets are definitely tighter. People are less confident about buying decisions. I think they're more wary, and certainly, you can look at all the layoffs that seem to be getting announced every other week. It's an indication of what's going on out there. It's definitely getting tougher.
What's your view on the volume of, why are these layoffs happening? Do you feel our view from a recruitment perspective is it looks like people overhired last year quite simply when the market was good and have maybe panic hired a bit and stockpiled too quickly?
I agree with that. I think, having spoken to a few CROs and a few organisations that we're talking to at the moment who are struggling this year a little bit. Certainly, I think last year, before things start to downturn, people were overhiring and maybe a little bit ambitious, maybe too optimistic, and then now they're trying to recover from that position. Numbers are down. They've maybe got too many bodies in place, and they're trying to work a way out.
Okay.
So it's tough.
It's definitely tough out there. I mean, one of the things we're seeing a lot is, or one of the things I'm hearing a lot from salespeople is the challenge of actually getting new business, the challenge of actually getting in front of people.
Yeah,
we've talked about it a lot internally here that actually 2022 or back at 21, 22 was so good. Those traditional, if you like, business development skills were almost not needed. Lots of business was coming in, lots of referrals, lots of people needing your help and wanting you to work with them. I'm hearing a lot of people that are saying things like cold calling is dead and it doesn't work. What's your sort of view on what salespeople need to be doing in a market like this? What are the basics that people need to be looking at when the market's tough?
It's a big question.
I've just asked you to solve 2023 right, in a question.
Yeah.
Come on, John, give us all the answers.
If I had the answer to all these things, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I think you're right. I've heard a lot of people saying, particularly on LinkedIn and in certain forums, that selling was easy, right? It's been easy for the last few years until this happened. I don't think that's the case, right? I don't think selling's ever been that easy. I don't think we've, as a profession, been that fantastic historically. So, forget about what's happening right now. If you look back even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, during boom times, if you took an average sales funnel, and these are sales qualified leads, according to most of the data out there, probably half of that funnel ends up in no decision, even 60%. And in fact, a lot of the customers that we speak to that come to us, even higher. So that says to me that, the sales profession hasn't been doing a fantastic job for a long time. And now that's been exposed because it's tougher. It's tougher now. So any deficiencies or deficiencies in capability or approach or methodology or whatever you want to call it, it's now under the spotlight. But if you look back historically, the profession hasn't done a fantastic job for a long time. There's just far too much of a funnel that hemorrhages, and some of that's poor qualification, some of it's poor approach and engagement to actually selling. But I think what's clear now is that in this sort of economic climate, and you can think back to 2008, 2009 for some lessons here, by the way, because it's not the first time we've been in this position. In fact, we've been in worse positions. If you look back then, there was a fantastic book that was produced on the back of that called The Challenger Sale. I don't know if you read that.
I know lots and lots of my candidates and my clients speak very highly of that book.
Yeah, so great book. I'd recommend it to anyone in sales, particularly if you're selling complex, multi-threaded deals, multi-stakeholder deals. But they basically looked at sales performance or seller performance during that economic downturn, and they found that while most sellers were struggling, there was a particular type of seller that they classified as the challenger. And by the way, the guys that wrote this, just to name drop if you want to read it, it's Matt Dixon, and a guy called Brent Adamson co-authored the book. But they found that during that period where things were tough, they looked at different types of sellers. So you've got the lone wolf, who's very much their own animal out there hunting themselves. You've got the relationship builders who have been relying on just creating strong customer relationships, which is important. But then they had this seller that they characterized as the challenger. And during that economic downturn, they found these sellers were excelling. And even in times of boom, when things were good, these sellers seemed to rise to the top of the pile. But particularly during that tough economic period, these sellers were still performing. And I think if you look back at what they were doing and what characterized them, it's really important. There's an important lesson for sellers today. These challengers were really going into these organizations, into these prospects or customers with a deep understanding of the customer's world. So going in with business acumen. They weren't trying to push product or solution. They were going in there and challenging the status quo and saying, look, we understand your world, we understand your business. I think you might have missed something. There's maybe an opportunity that you haven't quite capitalized on, or maybe some threats that you weren't aware of. So they were going in there with some insights and business acumen and really helping the prospect look at their business in a different light and almost creating opportunity on the back of that. And I think that's a mile away from where most sales organizations and sellers are today. This isn't new. I mean, when I started in sales 20 years ago, it's the same, right? I got very, very little sales training.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the first time I realized I was just getting it wrong, I was probably a year or two, maybe less than 2 years into my tenure with my first company, and I managed to get a meeting, I think, with some senior decision maker. I think it was on the back of some outreach, and I ended up vomiting our solution deck, our product portfolio over this poor guy for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, well, towards the end of the meeting, we both realized that he was looking for something else. There wasn't even a fit there.
Yeah.
And I walked away from that meeting and I was going, Jesus. I said, that was terrible, right? And I was, it was my first sales job. And I thought that was really, really bad. And I think that was the point I realized that I've had very little sales training. And I think companies conflate sales training with product training. It's like, well, you need sales training. We'll teach you all about our product. And that, if you look at most onboarding programs, they get these things wrong. And that's not changed. That's not changed. I think that's one of the big problems that we still see is sellers are just, they've been force-fed all these product benefits, and they're struggling to go out there and have opportunities that resonate, discussions or conversations that actually resonate with buyers, particularly today.
But I definitely think you're right. I totally agree with that sort of product training bit. And one of the things I've realised doing a role for the last 12 months that's heavily focused on, people and learning and development. There's the skills piece. There's the stuff you can teach people. So, for example, your example of the product, or here's a technique, here's a way of doing something, here's how to do it really effectively, here's to follow a process. And then there's almost that behaviours bit that I can tell you what they are, but unless you go and do it. So to your point on like researching a customer, I can't really do loads of coaching with you on that. I can tell you about the theory. It's up to you as the individual to actually put that into practice and go and do it and actually apply your training. So there's almost a confusion here with this feeling that I need loads and loads of training. Tell me. But actually what I need is coaching. I need to be told what the right behaviors are. And then me as a seller, again, your point of there's different types of sales people, person or technique or style. If you're a lone wolf, great, go and be a lone wolf, but figure out how to get the best out of it and go and be accountable for it and go and do it. Don't just try and become either something you're not, or don't try and think that by being given loads and loads and loads of training, you don't need to put any effort in yourself to actually have the right behaviors and do the right things and follow the right process.
Yeah, behaviors. I think that's the interesting thing that you said, behaviors. And if you're going to be successful, you have to build behaviors and habits. And you can read as many books as you like. I gave up reading books, I think, at some point in terms of reading sales books. I've read 2 or 3 good sales books. And often, and it's true for sales training as well, we tell sellers what they should do, but we don't coach or nurture them on how to do it and build those behaviors, build those habits. And it's funny because if you look at every other profession, if you want to be a rock star or a musician or a tennis player or chess player, the amount of practice and role play, we talk about role playing and sellers go, vomit appears in the back of their throat when they think of the concept of role play. But that's practice, right? Every other profession practices. They put the hours in. If you listen to the Beatles in the early 60s in Hamburg, compared to where they were 3 or 4 years later, there's a huge difference. It wasn't by fluke they got there. It was the practice they put in. And I think if you're going to build new behaviors and new habits, you don't do that unless you practice, you role play. And I think there is a big gap between telling sellers what they should do and coaching them on how they actually do that. And I could read a manual on how to become the best tennis player in the world. It's not going to help me unless I've got coaching and feedback and someone guiding me. And I think that there is a big gap there. How do you actually do this? So we talk about creating value. You need to create value, or you need to do fantastic discovery. Well, I know what I'm trying to do. I know what I'm trying to discover, but how? How do you do that? How do you go in there in those early conversations with someone who's maybe not that warm, which is particularly true right now? People aren't just lining up to buy things off you. How do you go into those conversations and have a conversation that gets that other person emotionally invested, excited, or motivated to do something different? And there's a big gap there from what we continue to see. It's that coaching.
Yeah, definitely. Just take me back a couple of steps. When you talked about that research piece and being really clued up on your prospects and submersing yourself in their world. So that's a great theory. Totally makes sense. But if you were advising a seller, maybe somebody early in the career or somebody that wants to pivot and sell in that way, how do you actually do that? Do you mean go on Google and research them? What do you actually mean? And then second part to that value bit, how are you articulating that value initially in a cold call or an intro email? How are you first piquing their interest?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, when you talk about the research, there's 2 types of research. There's customer-specific research. So if you're targeting a particular account, you want to understand some of the things going on with that customer, that organisation. But if you abstract it up a layer, and just forget about a particular company you're trying to target. If you're selling supply chain software to a supply chain leader, irrespective of the organization, whether you're selling to a Nestle, a Coca-Cola, or someone who produces electronics goods, there's going to be a huge overlap in problems and challenges that a supply chain leader faces. So even before you go to an individual account level, you can think pretty deeply around who you're trying to sell to, who's that persona. And I accept, look, it's not just one person, you're going to have buying groups, but usually someone is closest to the problem you're trying to solve. So maybe it's a VP of supply chain, for example. And, you have to start thinking about the world from their perspective. So right now, imagine it's a prospect or suspect. You're selling supply chain software. They don't have your capabilities. So forget about what you've got for a second, or keep that in the back of your mind and think about, what is a supply chain leader trying to achieve? What do they care about? Because that's going to influence whether or not they buy. What do they care about? And without your capabilities, why might they be struggling to achieve the things they care about? So they're going to be fixated on KPIs, they've got goals, their reputation is going to hang off achieving these things. How do they achieve those goals typically without you? What does that look like? And what problems might they be experiencing because of that, because of the way they're currently trying to do the job without your capabilities? And so you can start to think quite deeply about the problem statement, what that might look like for a typical target persona. And the problem's got a number of angles. There's emotional components to the problem. There's personal components to the problem for that particular supply chain leader. They might be struggling. Maybe they're struggling to deliver customer shipments on time. What does that look like or feel like? Well, they're getting it in both ears from customers demanding to know where stuff is. Their sales teams are shouting at them. The chief supply chain officer is going, this isn't good enough. Our customer satisfaction levels are dropping. How does that impact the business and the organization, these problems? Is there a downturn in revenue, or is it impacting profit margin? Is it impacting their reputation as a brand? So the more you start to think about the problem from your persona's perspective, that's where you start. And that's not at an organizational level. That's just, we sell sales training to CROs, right? So there's a common set of problems that sellers experience. So you can abstract it to that level first, and that's going to your other point. How do you start to create messaging that resonates?
The theory is brilliant, isn't it? But it's like, how does that outreach then manifest itself?
But that's the starting point. You've got to forget about your product. You've got to understand how people buy and make decisions, right? And they make decisions and buy based on what they care about, not your product. Okay. Not all these features and benefits, it's what they care about. Can I do the job I've been tasked to do? I care about my reputation. Am I struggling? They care about, one of the sort of Bibles for us is thinking fast and slow, which I know, we've spoken about before. In fact, I've probably got it here.
Is that Daniel Kahneman?
Yeah, I've always got it handy. Yeah.
How many points do I get for that, for knowing that?
Tick, full points. So I would encourage, and there's another point here that's really important, is before you think about sales process and sales methodology, I would encourage sellers to go back to first principles, which is, how do humans make decisions? How do they perceive value? How do they think? What biases affect and influence them? That's first principles. If you understand that, methodology, process should hang off that.
Yeah. Okay.
So understand first principles. And one of the big things that Kahneman talks about is something called loss aversion. So as human beings, we care twice as much about avoiding loss than achieving gain. And that's the biggest motivator, avoiding loss, getting away from pain, negative impacts, as opposed to pursuing gain and opportunity. It's not quite as simple as that, but we care much more about avoiding loss and achieving gain. So So you've got to think about, without your capability, your product, what does that problem look and feel like from the customer's perspective? What might they be losing that they care about if they don't take action? Maybe their reputation's impacted. There's going to be personal things in there. Maybe there's going to be business and organizational impacts as well, revenue, customers, brand reputation, all these things. And there's a little exercise you can do. So our customers go through this little exercise to help them think about this first, because that's the basis for messaging.
Yeah.
So we ask them to imagine their target persona having a few different types of conversation. So we say, look, imagine you're selling to supply chain leaders. They don't have your capabilities. They're struggling, right? They're struggling to do what they need to do. Imagine they're in the pub having a conversation with their friend, right? What does that conversation sound like? If they were to vent and, sort of vent all the struggles that they're having.
Yeah, so it's Friday night in the pub and your pal says, how's work going?
Yeah.
And we do this with our mates all the time, don't we? And you've got mates who work in all different sort of industries, and your mate goes, bang, and they download 10 problems. Yeah, got you. Okay.
Yeah, you don't look happy, James. What's going on at work? Oh, well, I'm kind of pissed, right? I've got customers shouting at me every other day in both ears. I've got our sales teams demanding that I get better because they're getting shouted at by their customers. I've got the CSO who's saying, look, this isn't good enough. Our NPS is dropping. And I've got pressure on, from the CFO to cut costs, and it's a bit of a shit show. And that's where you start to get into some of the really emotional type messaging that you could start to use in some of these outreach mediums. But then if you think about another conversation is, okay, so that's the pub conversation. So that's going to get to a lot of the emotive stuff. So if you follow our stuff, we talk about the chimp, the emotional decision maker. That's the chimp venting in the pub conversation. But if you imagine now that supply chain leader is motivated to change, they know what's in it for themselves. The next task is, how do I sell this internally? How do I get consensus? How do I sell the problem to the CFO, the CEO, the Chief Supply Chain Officer, the COO? So the next conversation that we encourage our customers to think about is that persona now in the boardroom trying to sell the problem to these other stakeholders and get them to care, right? Because at the end of the day, no one's going to change, right, from the status quo unless the problem is big enough.
Yeah.
So if you imagine your champion, you might have, you build a champion and they go, this sounds fantastic, James. We love what you're doing. This sounds good. It feels right for me. I need to get consensus. They're going to go internally and start having conversations and start socializing this, but they're going to get met with resistance because the chimp likes the status quo, right? And all these other people have got chimps as well. And the chimp finds the status quo safer. It's a safer position than change. Change is a risk. It might not work. It might fail. So let's just stick with the status quo. So if you have got a champion and they feel motivated and they go internally to start building consensus, they're going to get asked some pretty easy, simple questions, but maybe hard questions to answer. Like, what's wrong with what we're doing today, right? What's changed in the world? We've been managing supply chain like this for the last 3, 4, 5 years. What's changed that means the status quo is no longer good enough? If we don't change, what's the impact and why should I care? So that's the kind of thinking that's going on the customer side. And then you've got sellers coming in there talking about product and benefits and all these things. And the two conversations are just completely misaligned.
Yeah.
You've got people thinking about this in completely different ways.
So theoretically, I was just going to ask you then about sort of objection, your basic objections. So things like, go away, salesperson, we haven't got budget, or we're not reviewing this for another 6 months. But actually what you're talking about here, we're not looking for objections really. We're just looking to build relationships and understand problems and understand emotional needs before we're even getting anywhere near talking about our product or solving the problem or anything to do with that. So we've got to spend time. When you talked about discovery, it sounds like a lot of that discovery is to do with understanding exactly what these problems are.
It is, but going back to so you're absolutely right. It's not about going in with a solution and leading with a solution. It's about understanding the customer's motivation, where they are today, where they want to be, what's driving that, and potentially what they've got to solve for to do that. But no prospects don't turn up in the same way, right? So if you get an inbound prospect, they might come to the table and go, look, here's all the information.
Here's all the problems.
Yeah,
Here you go.
We've got it, right?
Perfect. Yeah,
but the problem you've got now is, and this is why I was sort of referring back to 2008, 2009 with challengers, is that there's not a plethora or myriad of prospects turning up at your door
Right.
today, right? Because everyone's almost paralyzed to some extent.
Yeah.
So the challenger goes in there and doesn't just go in and say, like, tell me what your problems are or what challenges have you got. The challenger's going in with a perspective and say, look, and for me, that's for a lot of sellers, this is probably alien. It's you have to go in with a perspective. You're going in with a perspective on their business, on their world. And again, you don't have to understand that organization specifically. You just, like, I know that supply chain leaders, because of COVID, because of the Suez blockage, because of disruptions to supply chain, I know that because of this world change, that there's a lot of pressure. And that if they're working in a particular way, or a typical approach to managing supply chain, there's pressure on that current approach, and there's problems that manifest on the back of that. So I can go in there and start to share a perspective and say, look, talking to other supply chain leaders, because of the world change that's been happening over the last 2 or 3 years, they're starting to feel pressure, and it's manifesting itself in these different ways, and it's creating these problems. And some of the impacts of those problems are X, Y, and Z. And you might not be aware of these things, so I'm maybe sharing a little bit of insight here as well. But you might not see any of this stuff. But if you've done your homework and you've thought about your buyer's world, if you go in with a perspective, there's a pretty good chance, if you share a bit of that perspective and it's insightful and it touches on a world they recognize, they're going to go, well, do you know what? I do see some of that stuff. And you're now into a discovery conversation, but you've provoked that conversation because you had something to go in with. You weren't just going in there and asking questions. But you're absolutely right. Now you're in there and you've got the conversation going. You're now into that. Well, let's discover what this might look like for you. And the solution piece is a way down the line. You're not talking about product. You're talking about the customers. Now, what are your goals? What are your specific challenges? But you've earned the right to have that conversation because you've went in with a perspective on their world. And that's a huge credibility builder. They're going, you understand some of the stuff that I'm going on. I hadn't even shared that with you, but you kind of hit the nail on the head.
Your head around it.
Yeah.
And I know you've talked to me about this before. I think it's a really interesting angle, but that idea of storytelling. I know you've talked to me about take that supply chain example, going into a customer and being able to perhaps talk to them about a story that might resonate with them. The competitor down the road. Here's the work. Not necessarily a case study, but here's how they're feeling. Here's the challenges they've got. So using it as a way to again, resonate and help them engage. How can sellers use storytelling, and why do you think it's important?
Well, I think just touching on what I said, as a perspective, to go in there with a perspective, I think you can go in with a story. So our customers, one of the things they do is they give their sellers a story to go into those early conversations, to start to really get discovery going, but to start shaping and positioning as well. And storytelling is really powerful. So the type of story that our customers go in with, again, there's a hero in this particular story, and the hero is the persona that they're selling to, right? So that's that supply chain leader or that organization, those people that are involved in that.
So the hero definitely doesn't need to be, hey, I'm a salesperson, I'm the top biller, I've won the award. Don't make that person the hero. Right?
Well, it's funny, we ask that question. We do this thing called an energizer, and it's a sort of half-day session where sellers are introduced to the concept of the chimp and some of the rules around the chimp, the chimp operating system. That's what we call it. And we ask sellers, we ask the question. We say, look, in your conversations between you and the buyer, who's the hero, right? And most people get it right. Okay, they'll say, you get the odd seller that says, "Oh, we're the hero, we're the hero." But most sellers go, "No, it's the buyer," right? And it's like 100%, you're spot on. Unfortunately, in most of the conversations that you're having, you are inadvertently positioning yourself as the hero. And they're like, "What do you mean?" And it comes down to the language that sellers use, and not just sellers, human beings use, right? We use the word "we" a lot. Well, we can do this, we can that, we can improve this, we can make that better for you. You're the hero. That's making you the hero.
Yeah.
So it's important that when you're using storytelling, that and the framework our customers use is the hero's journey. So they're sharing a story with their prospects that the hero, the prospect, can see themselves in, because they are the protagonist in this particular storyline. So that they'll use language like, well, other supply chain leaders are telling us this.
Mm-hmm.
There's these changes in the world. There's maybe one or two disruptive truths, or a bit of insight in the story that sort of shines a light on the world change and some of the problems that's creating. And because it's a story and it talks about problems and the impacts of these problems, it doesn't talk about solution, but it talks about specific problems that at some point are going to lead back to capabilities the seller has, right? But because it's framed from the perspective of the buyer or someone that does their job, they see themselves in it, and it naturally pulls them into a conversation. And it's almost now a framework for discovery, because you've got a straw man or hypothesis or perspective that you're sharing that they can see themselves in with. And so then you start to layer questions in on top of this, but they don't feel like it's discovery anymore, or they don't feel like they're being interrogated. They feel that they're, collaborating and contributing to this particular storyline. But then, go back to the language things. When sellers do start to talk about their product or solution, they start to say things like, well, we can fix this, so we can give you these capabilities, and we can do X, Y, and Z. And it's tiny little differences in language that make a huge difference.
This is one of the things I've really got into. So a lot of our training we've done here, we pivoted definitely into coaching people more about selling, rather than, obviously there's an element here is how you do recruitment, but a bit like we said earlier in the convo, you can kind of teach people that quite quickly. There's almost a manual you can give people for that, but it's that sales coaching element, and definitely the language. I'll give you an example. There's a session that I'll do with some of our most junior staff people 6 months into the job, where I asked them to put together an opening line of a pitch. It might be an email, it might be a text message, or a call that you're putting out, and you're not allowed to use I. So you'll get it yourself. How many emails do we get off sellers? I'm a specialist and I do this. And I'll bring examples and ask them, count how many times there's I and how many times there's you. And the exercise I get them to do is we go around the room, and obviously a lot of them fall into the trap of they'll start with I, and I say, okay, do it again, but you can't use I. You're banned from using I. So it becomes from being this big waffly sort of introduction to going really simple. So one of the things that will drive me mad, they'll outreach to a prospect and they'll go, I've heard that you're looking for a salesperson. So, I know that there's a lead, but you're kind of saying, why do they care? They're really busy, and you've just sent them a message going, I know you've got a problem. It's stupid, it's stupid. So we talk about doing outreach that's more just, there's a brilliant sales leader coming at your competition right now, something like that as an opening line, and then talking about 3 exciting reasons why this person's relevant. Not they're really good at new business, but try and bring an actual personality to the conversation. Their eldest is just about to go to university, so they're really money driven or something like that, or they're a top performer against the peer group of 50 other people. Just something that's really contextual and brings it to life. And then a really simple instruction at the end, or command: would you like to chat, or would you be interested? Or really stripping out a lot of that stuff. But it's the language that I find is so important, trying to differentiate yourself. And this is nowhere near the complexity that you're talking about. This is fairly basic, I would say, in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about outreach and things, come back to that if you like, because I think there's some really good, there's 1 or 2 outreach experts I would recommend. I can maybe give you push in the right direction. The main goal of outreach on a message should be to provoke curiosity.
Okay.
And give a hint of value. So if that person opens the email and goes, oh, you know something I don't, and it's something I think I should know about, you're trying to promote an emotional response, and that, it's curiosity. You want them to go, hang on a second, I want more here, because you've left me kind of hanging a little.
This is a chimp response. This is your chimp, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
The chimp's insanely curious, right? And it's, it won't, if there's a puzzle if it's been given a puzzle, it won't stop until it solves the puzzle. So the hook, the knowledge gap that you create, the chimp wants to close that. That's why we love puzzles, right? Because we love playing those games. So curiosity, that's what you're trying to invoke in that first contact. Get them curious enough to go, hang on a second, I want a conversation here. And there's a lot of evidence, if you like, or and this is, maybe some people will think this is crazy, but some of the evidence based on empirical data suggests you don't even need a call to action.
Okay.
That can actually weaken the tone. It can, it makes you appear more salesy, more needy. If you get that message right, you don't need a call to action, because they come back to you because they want to know more about what you've just spiked, or more about what you've just shared. So you're not even giving solution at this point. You're hinting at some value, but you're letting them know you know something that they should care about. There's a whole art to doing that, and we can talk about
So it's like an assumption, isn't it, basically? If I've got my messaging right, you obviously you're going to want to speak to me.
Yeah, it's, they need to be emotionally invested. They need to feel, you're pulling them towards you as opposed to sort of coercing them towards you, pushing them towards you. That you want them to come to you because what you've said has hit the nail on the head. And so the best outreach messages are very short. They might not even have that CTA, and but they provoke the curiosity, and the chimp goes, do you know what? I need to know more about this because it sounds important to the things I care about.
How provocative are we being? Because I'm all for being like dead creative, and I don't mean I don't want to go around upsetting people, but I'm up for trying. Let's stand out. Let's do something a bit different. But when let's say we talk about provocation, what to what line are we going to here? What give me an example of what we might actually say to try and prod somebody.
There's loads of examples. I mean, I'm not confusing provocation with upsetting someone. So provocation is just to provoke curiosity. So it might be a question, it might be a calibrated question. I'm trying to think of one in our world. What are you doing to avoid, or how are your sellers avoiding the ROI trap? Leading with ROI loses more. And the data shows you lead with ROI, you lose more deals.
So by saying something like the ROI trap, somebody might go, I don't want to be in a trap. I don't know what the ROI trap is, but I like ROI. That needs to be really good. Even that name has made my brain started going trap. Don't want to be in a trap, and I really like having a good ROI. So straight away, I'm like, I need to know what this is.
Or if I was selling to a sales leader, I might say, how are your sellers avoiding the ROI trap? So there's a bit of confusion around that. The data shows that when sellers lead with logical ROI messages, you lose more deals. And they go, I thought selling with ROI was a good thing. I thought,
and logic sounds like it would be good.
So all I've done there is I've maybe asked a question, to get you thinking about your situation, and played in a disruptive truth, something that jars with conventional wisdom. So at the start of our discovery conversation, so maybe I want to cut this bit. I've got to watch what I say here, to be fair. But if you can challenge conventional wisdom and get them curious with something that challenges conventional wisdom, the chimp's going to grab onto that. So I'll give you an example in our conversations with prospects, in these first conversations, or even some of our messaging. Sellers are told to push ROI messages, particularly now, right? You've got to be pushing the ROI and demonstrating that to your prospect. Well, do you know what? The data unequivocally shows that when sellers introduce ROI at any point in the sales process, you lose more deals. So when sellers proactively introduce or try to influence using ROI style messaging, you end up losing more deals. So conventional wisdom and conventional training is all wrong. In fact, sellers are told when deals are slipping to go back and remind the prospect of all the problems with the status quo. You said you had these problems. You said it was impacting you in this way. Well, guess what? When that happens, you lose more deals. So conventional wisdom is completely misaligned with decision making, with the way people think and
Yeah.
Right. And so that's an example of, if I share that little narrative chunk with a CRO, they go, shit, I didn't know that. So we're doing something that we think is the right thing to do, but it's hurting us.
Yeah.
I don't have to talk about the solution, right? I don't have to say, with Slingshot Edge you get. Yeah, I've just prodded the chimp and the chimp, with a disruptive truth, something that challenges conventional wisdom, that the other person goes, shit, I could be hurting myself inadvertently here. I need to. I'm not trying to get you angry. I'm just, I'm giving you a bit of information, a bit of insight that brings you to the conclusion that, well, there's something you don't understand going on here that you need to understand.
Okay, so then we've got that hook, and then it becomes the storytelling, and then you can talk about, the CRO down the road or working in your competition. Here's what they found. Here's how they feel. Here's their challenges, and that bit about, it's almost that assumption, isn't it, that through that conversation, we're hoping here to get to a point where that CRO says to you, wow, John, what is it exactly you guys can do to help with this loss aversion, to help me not have this problem? So almost at no point you're having to say, actually, I can fix it, because you want in them to come round to going, I really need your help. And it sounds like you can help me here.
Yeah, if you've defined the problem that well, that they see themselves in that storyline and it resonates, and they just see themselves and feel themselves in there, and you've kind of hit the nail on the head. 100%, you're absolutely right. The best reaction is, how do you help? Because this is right. You've nailed this, right? Now, again, I'm not encouraging sellers to start just when we talk about storytelling, it's not about just vomiting a monologue.
Yeah.
That's not the purpose of a story. The story is to bring the other person into that story as well. So as you start to share some of these perspectives or insights and what's going on, you start, what tends to happen is they go, hang on a second, you're bang on the money there, right? You've hit the nail on the head. Or you would pause as a seller and you would start to ask questions, or maybe even say, look, you might not see this, right? So you might use some of the Chris Voss no-oriented question type techniques.
I was hoping you were going to go Chris Voss, because the bit I took away from that book that I love two things. I love get to know quickly, and I love that's right.
Yeah.
So you get the buyer to go. So I was about to say we're heading down that territory. I'm hoping, if I've understood.
Yeah, definitely. And that's like going back to the language thing, and why Chris. There's a really good clip that Chris Voss shares on the difference between you phrasing and we phrasing. His reference, by the way, is the same. He references Kahneman heavily. So he knows all about loss aversion and language and things. And he talks about, the difference in language can make a huge difference. So you phrasing versus we phrasing. So instead of me saying, we do this, we do that, we can help you achieve these things as well. You can achieve this. You can do these things. With these capabilities, you can avoid that pain and you can achieve these outcomes. You're the hero. You're empowered in the storyline. But the way you ask a question is important as well. So he talks about no-oriented questions. So if I'm sharing a little bit of a problem statement with a prospect, essentially dangling the problem to see if they bite, I might say, look, other CROs there, they find that sellers are doing poor discovery. Either they're interrogating the buyer or they're not getting enough information. Either way, what ends up happening is deals slip, blah, 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 blah. Now, a lot of sellers, after sharing a little chunk like that, will say, do you see that? Or is that impacting you as well? And there's a subtle shift there to a no-oriented question where you could just go, look, perhaps you don't see that. This might be off the mark. So it's a subtle shift. So rather than me trying to trap you into saying yes, I'm going to respect your chimp's autonomy by allowing you to say no. So maybe you don't see that. No, John, I do see that. Or this is maybe off the mark. No, it's not off the mark. There's a subtle change in how you phrase the question. And again, buyers have been burned for decades by sellers trying to push them into saying yes, trying to push them through processes, trying to trap them into saying yes. And there's now a stereotype bias that's been around for as long as I've been in sales, and it's still here, sadly, of this pushy, manipulative seller.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And totally feel that.
And again, it goes back to conventional wisdom and what sellers have been taught to do and what I was taught to do. I've been taught to do all the wrong things to make buyers feel uncomfortable, to try and close them, to try and push them through a process, push them to next steps, cut down their options, trap them. And all that happens is at some point they might agree to the next meeting, but they disappear. They ghost you because the chimp doesn't want to be controlled or caged or trapped. So
even if you think by definition, then you talk about trap, don't you, Kane? But as a sales person, we talk about closing. So it's almost like you're closing the trap.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Isn't that a stupid way to? Why would you want to do that to somebody that you want to do business? Like, I'm not going to retire for like another 30 years, maybe longer. I'm hoping I want to do business with you lots and lots of times. Why do I want to close you in a trap? Just for the sake of, I can get my commission on the board today versus in a month's time. Well, who cares? I'm going to be working for a lot more than a month,
Totally. I remember it was actually a recruitment consultant years ago. It wasn't you.
Oh, it's got to be kid from Manchester.
It was Paul Thompson. No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
No, it was years ago, and I went for an interview, and again, I was fairly young. I wasn't young, but people. I've only been selling for 20 years. People think he's had a hard paper round, but I had a career before I moved into sales. So I moved into sales when I was 30. But anyway, I was early on in my career, and I went for a job, and the recruitment consultant said, "Remember, and try and close the guy at the end." And it was a managing director that interviewed me, and so we went through the interview, and at the end I tried to close him, and I felt horrible, right? I felt really uncomfortable, and I could tell he felt really uncomfortable as well, just with the way I'd done it. But again, I was following conventional wisdom and training. You have to try and close, right? Needless to say, I didn't get the job. He didn't come back to me.
What was your close? Can you remember?
Oh, I can't remember now. It was something like, is there any reason or any reason that you can't see you working, bringing me on, or some kind of horrible thing that, and he went, well, I could feel him squirm and just, not feeling that great. And listen, that, don't get me wrong, there's, that you need to uncover objections and concerns and worries that your buyer has, but there's a way to do that with high EQ and an empathetic way. But unfortunately, most sellers are taught to do things in a way that really misaligns with the chimp. It gets the chimp's back up. It makes the chimp feel really uncomfortable. I think one of the biggest lessons.
Sorry, John. What's a really simple workaround for something like that? Would you go? How do you be? I don't know. Not how do you feel of interview today? That's really crap, isn't it? But where I'm going with it, are you asking more about feelings? Are you asking more about opinions? How can you ask that question better?
Yeah, I think tonality is really important, and it's something that not everyone talks about in sales. You can share really horrible words if you get tonality right. But yeah, so Chris Voss talks about emotional anchors, and I think he's, if we're going to talk about books, then that's the one book that I think most sellers should just go and read, because it really helps change your mindset from stop trying to control people, give them autonomy, give them freedom, give them free will, and do you know what? They're more likely to come towards you, right? The harder you push them, the harder they pull away. The more you pull away, the more they come towards you, and that's counterintuitive, right? Because you're trying to close deals, you want to progress things. Every sinew in your body's saying, we need to get to next steps, need to agree this, need to agree that. At some point, they just wriggle free because they just don't like to be controlled. But to your question, Chris Voss talks about emotional anchors. So you might say something like, listen, I hope you don't mind. That's a no-oriented phrasing. I hope you don't mind if I ask a really, hard question. They go, no, what is it? Well, I was just wondering, have you got any concerns based on the conversation we've had, so far? And I appreciate if you don't want to share that. So tonality and the emotional anchor, I hope you don't mind sort of a no-oriented framing. I'm going to ask you quite a hard question. That's an emotional anchor. So the other person's thinking, right, what are they going to ask? Is it a really hard question? And then you come in with a question, and it's not that bad.
Yeah.
Sort of set anchor there. So I think tonality is important, and certainly the language you use as well. But I think that recruitment agent at the time, consultant, was giving me this is how you close. Here's a hard close. You know, it's how you do it. It comes across as pushy, comes across as aggressive, or just pushy and just uncomfortable.
It's really interesting, John, because one of the things I've done a lot in the last 12 months, I've done a lot of work with people that are looking at getting into recruitment. And obviously the world that we're in is sales recruitment. So I'm speaking with hopefully the future sales stars of, you know, the next 10, 20, 30 years. And one of the things that drives me bonkers, we've gone full circle here from your days when you were getting into sales in your story and you did a hard close. People don't close. I very rarely get people who will close, and I'm a very the conversation I'll have initially with people, I'll say at the top of the meeting, look, this is going to be really informal. I want to get to know you. Here's what I'm going to talk about. You can ask me anything you want at the end. I'm not going to be anything different other than how I am with, normally my family, my friends. I'm totally authentic and don't put a mask on. So let's go for it. We get to the end of that meeting, and I always will give them the question, which is, what else would you like to ask me? So I'm even teeing it up, and I'm so surprised that so few people don't even ask anything to do with how's it gone, or what do you think, or anything. I can't believe it. I'm staggered. It's just mind-boggling.
It is. So
is this a I don't want to put the booting on, I'm not going down that route. Let's all put the booting on young people in Gen Z, but is this a societal thing, or it can't be a training thing? Why do we think this is happening?
Why do you think they're not
they're not even can I come and see you? We've done this chat on Teams. Hey, I'm in Manchester next week. Hey, I live around the corner. Like, why don't we grab a coffee? There's nothing. Yeah. It's like, bye, that's it, great, bye.
Yeah, I feel whatever I say here, the millennials and Gen Zs will probably kill me.
I'm not trying to cancel John Bissett. John's been cancelled.
To be honest, I don't know. I don't know why.
Let me give you another example that might help a bit better. So and now I'm flipping onto experienced sales professionals, right? People that have been in sales a long time, people are doing great and in good money, working for good companies. They'll come out of an interview and they'll say to us, they didn't feel it was appropriate to close.
Right.
What's that?
Yeah.
How's that a thing? I can't get my head around it. What mental?
So I think there's probably a stigma around this concept of closing, right? So I think the stigma, and if you look at it historically, you look at all of these closing methodologies, and people just, there's an awareness now that that's not right, okay? It doesn't feel right, because at the end of the day, what is selling and buying? It's a series of conversations that both parties at some point say, this feels right, let's commit to the next stage, right?
Yeah.
So closing is something that should happen naturally, right, in the sales process. And you can guide a process without it feeling like I'm taking away your control or trying to push you, right? And
it's that trap bit that you talked about that's really resonated with me. It's not. I'm not trapping you. It's not. And it like shouldn't dark feel like arts. Yeah.
And it should feel like we're both agreeing to keep moving forward, because this conversation is of genuine interest to both of us, right? So when closing is a thing that you're not going to close a deal because you tried some closing technique. You're not going to sell a 6 or 7 figure bit of software because you've done some clever closing maneuver, right?
I didn't want it this morning, but now you've closed me, John. Here's $1 million quid. Right?
They're going to do business with you because of all the stuff that happens before that.
Yeah.
Right? They come to a point, and the buying group comes to a point where they go, yeah, the status quo is no longer good enough, right? We want to be here, but we're here right now. And if we don't get there, I'm impacted personally, and the business is impacted. And actually, we now have a very clear route in terms of what we need to fix, root causes, capability gaps to get there. So it's, closing doesn't happen because the seller wants it to happen. It's a natural progression based on everything that's taken place earlier on in the conversations. But going back to your point, I think as well, and it sounds like you were, amazed that candidates aren't asking for feedback on how, or trying to get some feedback from the
so I think I'm going. we all agree, don't we, that hard close, that trap, we don't like that. That's old school and doesn't make anybody feel good. But then there's this whole, the definition I mean, I think based on what we've talked about, the word close we need to put in the bin, because that's just not the right word. But definitely that agreeing next steps bit.
Yeah.
I can't see why in that whole spectrum of how you could ask that question at the end, how when somebody says, what is there anything else you'd like to ask me, how the answer to that question could possibly be no. I just don't get it.
And if you look at the number one reason that sellers lose deals, right? And this would be true like for candidates, whether you're, it's the same thing, right? You've got
no matter where you're at in your career or the seniority.
Yeah, and the number one reason that sellers lose deals, and maybe one of the big reasons that candidates don't get employed, is that the other person's got concerns, right? The buyer in your world, or if you've got a candidate and an employer, the buyer's the employer, the candidate's the seller. But in the world of B2B sales buyers, the number one reason that deals are lost is no decision, right? The data is clear on that. So the buyer does nothing different, sticks with the status quo. The biggest reason, and this came out the back of a bit of research that Matt Dixon and Tim McKenna did in their new book, Jolt, The Jolt Effect, which is a fantastic book as well. The number one reason that buyers stick with the status quo is they're scared of messing up. They're scared of making a change, and it doesn't actually improve their situation. So the old conventional wisdom was, well, if they stick with the status quo, it means the problem with the status quo isn't big enough to risk change.
Yeah. So it's that loss aversion bit, isn't it? Like if I move, I might be in a worse position.
Exactly.
Right.
So what the Jolt effect, the data they found is that the number one reason that buyers don't change and stick with the status quo isn't the fact that the status quo was okay. There was a big enough problem, right, to move away. They genuinely wanted to move away from the status quo, but they were scared that they chose the wrong course of action. What if I change something, go through, wholesale change, I champion change, and I pick the wrong path? What if we end up in a worse position? What if all those fantastic benefits the seller has promised don't materialize? What if that business case doesn't pay off? Well, that's on me. That's my neck on the line, right? So it's that fear of messing up. And there's maybe a lot of options. They've got, 4 or 5 vendors that look kind of the same. They're all saying the same thing. And all these doubts it's again, the chimp starts to, tell itself a story. Do you know what? Probably better just sticking down here with the status quo than making a decision. And it actually doesn't pay off because it's my neck on the line. So,
and then we're definitely going to feel bad. We're really going to go into our shell when we're feeling that way. And the salesperson rings us up and goes, "Sign today, John, and I'll give you 10% off. Close. You're just going to be like, no, get me away from this person. I'm 100%. Not feeling good."
Yeah, and that's why when sellers are, when deals are sticking and sellers are trying to remind the prospect of all of the pain of the status quo, it doesn't work. You actually lose more deals, right? That's not what top performers do. Top performers recognize that actually that person right now, or those people are probably a little bit paralyzed. They're fearful of making a decision, right? So rather than reminding them of all the pain of the status quo, it's just as like, the seller's fixated on one problem, but the prospect's thinking about a different problem. And the seller's trying to turn up the negative emotion when the buyer's chimp's already in a frenzied state. It backfires, right? So the best thing you can do as a seller is recognize that's where the prospect is and say, look, I know this has moved. Perhaps you're concerned, right? You've probably got a few concerns about making this decision. And trying to get, you want to try and get those objections on the table or those worries. And it goes back to your point, with the sort of candidate and the employer at the end of that conversation. You should, as the candidate or the seller, want to give the other person the opportunity to share any concerns or worries they've got. Because if you don't address those concerns or worries, that's what kills deals. Unaddressed fears, unaddressed concerns in the buyer's head kills deals. I've been through a 12-month sales process where we were literally selected as preferred supplier, 7-figure software deal, working on T's and C's, and they've pulled out. right? And they've turned around and said, look, we're not going to do anything. We're going to stick with the status quo.
Right.
And I was like, well, what happened? You've been through this massive process.
Yeah.
You've spent a lot of money going through this process, as have we. But what happened? And it transpired that they were concerned about the level of change, taking more change on, right, at this stage. And they were concerned that they were going to be early adopters.
Right.
So that was a learning point for me. I thought, Christ, if I had addressed that earlier in the sales process or the buying process, what concerns do you have about this type of project, or what worries do you have about moving things forward? The reason I ask is other people in your situation were worried about the level of change they were going to have to go through. Having that conversation earlier on is that would have been a much better thing to do, because once you get the fears on the table and the concerns on the table, the chimp calms down a bit. So if they have got any worries or concerns, just by talking about them, their chimp starts to calm down. And then when it calms down, you can start to have a more logical conversation on how to address those concerns. So if you're a seller or a candidate, you 100% want to be getting any concerns on the table. So if I'm a candidate, you're an employer, I should be saying to you, listen, this is, hope you don't mind me asking, it's probably quite a tough question, and I appreciate if you don't want to answer it, but have you got any concerns about me based on what, the conversation today? And if the candidate or the seller knows what some of those concerns might be, go as far to actually, offer them.
Yeah. I want people to give it to me straight, and I'll give them, and it's the Voss get to know, because I'd rather walk out of there as a candidate knowing it's not going to move forward than thinking it is and wondering why is the next interview not been set up. And same as a seller, I'd rather qualify out early.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I feel that it's going well with a prospect, and they feel motivated to move forward, something I do fairly early on is say, look, what worries do you have about this, about bringing this methodology in? And I'll suggest some reasons for them, right? I want to have a conversation around it, because if we don't have a conversation around it and they have got concerns, it's no decision. They're not going to move forward. They might not tell me, they might ghost me, they might just end up saying, look, John, thanks, but no thanks. But unless you get the concerns on the table, you can't do anything about them. But the act of getting them on the table actually is really good. It's cathartic, right, for the other person as well.
Is that the bit where you could story tell? So you could say, I did this project recently with your direct competition, and at this stage, their FD had a problem and had a concern, and it was this.
Well, I wouldn't. You've got to be careful here. This is where objection handling goes wrong, right? Mm-hmm. If you start to say, look, other people felt this, they found that, they felt the next thing. Mm-hmm. They're thinking, I don't care about other people. Right, it's my concern, right? So what you do is you want to give them the opportunity to vocalize the concern. So what I might do is say, look, what worries have you got about bringing us in or doing this project? And they might go, okay, I've got these concerns. Great, let's talk about them, right? And I'm not going to try and persuade you or convince you, right? Well, other people have those concerns, but they found this. No, let's talk about your concerns. Let's give you the space to talk about them and get them out there. It's the old Chris Voss, seek to understand before you seek to be understood mentality. Let's talk about these concerns, right? What is it about that particularly? All right, well, it's a big project, a lot of change. I am concerned that, if we bite off more than we can chew right now, can we handle that? Do I have the resources? Okay. Would it be a bad idea to start with a smaller pilot area so that you're not tackling, how can we de-risk this, right? You're now into de-risking. And trying to mitigate some of those concerns.
But would it be a bad idea? Is the best question ever. That's the best. If there's one thing you take out like Chris Voss book that is a golden rule for life, you can win at you can do anything socially. If you go to, would it be a bad idea if I nip in here and have a quick pint while you're in the bookshop or whatever?
Unfortunately, my wife and kids are now so tuned into me. My son's read Chris Voss as well. He's watched some of his masterclasses, so he sort of goes, "Dad, come on, right?" Yes, it would be a bad idea, okay, if you did that. But no, so getting the concerns on the table is important, and actually going as far as to say, look, what concerns have you got? The reason I ask is sometimes other VPs have been concerned that this is just a lot of change to take on right now. Right, and I'm not going to try and then persuade you as to what they did or how they got round that or how we mitigate that. I'm just going to lay it out there and say that was the concern. But maybe that you don't see that, or just leave this, just put it out there and then just zip it and let them talk. Because the only way they're going to get over objections or concerns is if they talk it through themselves.
Yeah.
I can't convince you, right? If you go to therapy, if you speak to a psychologist or therapist, they're not trying to convince you of anything. They're giving you the space to get your problems out there and let you dissect them yourself.
Yeah, like unravel it. You almost got all this stuff in your head, and it's like unraveling it and then going, okay, I can process this now.
Yeah, and I can guide you. And if you say, well, I'm concerned that if we do this project, it's a lot to chew off, and have we got the resources? I might even suggest that. What concerns have you got? Other people were concerned that was it going to consume all their resource because it's a big project. They're not shut up, and you'll go, well, it's not that, John. Here's the concern, right? Or it is that, John, and you're like, okay, right. And then once they've articulated their concern, that helps regulate their chimp. Their chimp talks itself off the ledge a little bit, tunes down the emotion. You now create space for a logical conversation on how to address the concerns. Okay, so you're concerned about the level of resource or your capacity or the amount of change you're going to bring in. Big project, a lot of investment. What if it doesn't materialize all of these benefits? What's your thoughts on starting with a smaller pilot project first? Or what's your thoughts on just doing this little thing first as a proof point? Give you confidence that it's the right thing to do, and you can test it out there. So, and again, that for a lot of sellers, that's counterintuitive because they're thinking, well, I just want to sell the big thing. And it's like, well, you end up selling nothing because you didn't address the concern and fear. So, you have to now work through ways of de-risking this for your buyer. And that might mean doing a smaller pilot initially. It might mean you have breakout clauses in the contract. It might be something, but that's what sellers have. You need to be addressing these concerns fairly early on and giving your buyer confidence that they can make a decision without risking their reputation and neck. And
this was very early in my recruitment career, long time ago. Do you know the guy from Scotland called Archie Bryce? He might be at Oracle now. He's certainly at Oracle a long time ago. Really good guy. Bryce. Yeah. But he gave me this theory that's probably like a really common theory, but it stuck with me and I really love it. And he called it the submarine theory. He talks about when you close in a deal, the same way in a submarine, you got to go through each door and make sure it's sealed and locked before you go through to the next one. And then if the other one, there's water dripping through, you can't keep moving through the submarine. You got to go back. It's exactly like you're saying here. It's that baby step mentality. You can't just, Trojan horse through to the close and get, expect to get this multi-million-pound deal closed, because exactly like the story you told, you get to that day, you think you're going to get it and you lose it. And it's all because of you've not gone through that process.
Yeah. And it's counterintuitive for sellers. They don't want to open the can of worms, right? We've sellers, and I put my hand up as well. We've got this happy ears condition. We just want to hear the positive. We don't want to look for reasons that the deal might fail. So why would you ever go near open the can of worms, and why would you ever suggest to the prospect reasons they might be concerned? Because maybe they weren't thinking in that way, and you've now planted a negative thought. Well, you can't plant negative thoughts. It's either in their head or it's not in their head, right? And if you don't address it, if you don't open the can of worms, guaranteed it's going to kill you. It's going to bite you at some point. No decision's massive, and it's because at the end of the day, more than half of no decision is because prospects were afraid to make the wrong decision. The status quo wasn't fantastic, but they were just concerned that if they make a decision to do something different and it backfires, it's their neck on the line. And actually, the jolt effect that came out last year, they talk about something called the omission bias. So there's probably a couple of biases working here. The prospect is afraid to lose something if the decision goes, doesn't pay off. That's loss aversion. But omission bias also says that we as humans prefer to suffer through inaction than to suffer through action that we took, even if the status quo is worse. So we'd prefer to sit here in the frying pan and not jump into the fire in case, it was a fire we're going to jump into. We'd just rather sit here and suffer through inaction.
But there's a hole in my walking boots, and because I'm so worried about buying the wrong pair, I'll just hope it's not raining and keep walking, and these boots will be fine. Have I got that theory right? I've understood what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned another thing when it comes to buying stuff. One of the other reasons that you've got this no decision is the amount of choice that prospects have, right? So they're scared to make a decision because it might not materialize, or it might actually create a worse situation, and it's their reputation on the line if they've championed change. But also, they don't know what to do because they're confused. There's so much information flying about, right? Can I let my dog out very quickly?
Of course, can yeah. Go for it.
Snorting in the background. It's so they've got too much choice, right? So if you've ever shopped online or on Amazon or on ASOS or something, and you're like, I want a new jacket, and 400 jackets come back, you go, oh. You end up.
Well, it's the Netflix, right? And I remember feeling this way a few years ago, right? When you sit down and say you've got the telly to yourself, which is very rare, definitely very rare in my house. But you'll put Netflix on or whatever. The amount of stuff you feel really overwhelmed, and often go back to watching a film that you've watched before. Yes. So there's definitely something at play there, which is that loss aversion, or there's definitely, like you were talking about there, I don't want to commit to something new in case it's rubbish. At least I know this will be good old faithful Braveheart or Ocean's 11 or whatever. Yeah. But the example I was thinking was, how often, when you go on holiday and you go in a hotel or wherever, and they've only got 4 channels or 4 English channels, you can quite happily sit contently and watch telly because your choice is so limited. Whereas when you're at home, you end up just not really committing to anything because your choice is so vast. But you end up watching something you would never normally watch at home. I was in a hotel in Bristol and I watched about 2 hours of Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. I absolutely loved it. I was like, this is brilliant. I'm so relaxed. And it's because that choice just wasn't there.
That's right. You just made me say that's right. If you've right, because you've just explained exactly what was going on in my head there. So that's what you want your customers to say. That's right. But no, absolutely, I'm the same. If my wife goes out for a night or whatever, and I'm in the house myself, I end up watching nothing because I'm like, I don't know where to go. And there is the sort of paradox of choice, and they've shown that the more choice that you have, actually, your likelihood of making a choice drops off, right? So when you go and search for that new jacket on ASOS or whatever, and there's 300 jackets coming back, you end up abandoning the search because you just get overwhelmed, right? Whereas if 4 jackets came back, you'd make a choice fairly easily. So there's a lesson for sellers there as well. If you can't control what your competitors put forward to your prospect, but you can control what you put forward. So don't have lots of options and choices. Make some strong recommendations. Limit the choice, limit the options. You understand the problem, you understand what your buyer's trying to achieve, you understand their goals and the root cause of the problem, blah, 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 blah. Make strong, clear recommendations. Limit the options, because that's another reason that people get paralyzed. They go, I don't know what to do. You described it. The Netflix is a perfect example. It's Netflix, Amazon, Sky, and you end up, you've wasted 2 or 3 hours and you haven't watched anything. But when you go to the hotel, there's 4 channels. Yeah, well,
I'll pick something.
I'll just pick something, and you enjoyed it, Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I'm mindful we're running out of time, and there's one last thing I did want to talk to you about. You talked a lot about books and things to read, which is cool. I love recommendations like that. Sales. There's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs. There's certainly a lot of ups and downs this year, and the way the market is. You talked about the CRO in the pub on a Friday night, knocking back 10 pints with his mate. Is that whether or not that's a good relaxation, stress busting technique? I don't know. What do you do to get some downtime? What do you do to chill out, to actually tackle the mental roller coaster that is business?
Yeah, good question. Probably a few things. I think one thing, my mindset has changed in the last. The older I've got, my mindset has definitely changed. I'm not as stressed or as as much of a control freak. Maybe Callum will disagree, but I accept I can't control everything. There's certain things in your control, certain things aren't. But one thing I've been doing quite a lot of in the last, this might sound a bit woohoo, the last 6 or 12 months is meditation. That helps. Definitely helps. Just even 10, 15 minutes a day. I feel the difference on the days that I haven't done it. If I let it go 2 or 3 days without doing it, I feel the difference. I think just switching off for 15, 20 minutes really helps. Just sort of declutter what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think of it as like, I think if you'd have said to people, maybe as recent as 2-3 years ago, oh, come and do meditation, they'd think it's like this barefoot hippie, legs crossed, chanting whatever type thing. And really, it's I just liken it to stretching. If you went and played football or went in the gym or something, you'd stretch off, wouldn't you? Of course you would. And if you didn't, and you went to bed, you'd wake up the next day going, "Oh my days, I'm stiff as like the Tin Man. Like I wish I did." And that's all it is. You've got your brain is buzzing around, and if you don't reset it and let it just flatten out and put all the thoughts in the right boxes and just you're just compiling a tangle of wires upon a tangle of wires upon a tangle of wires. You've got to kind of let it go down. So I'm totally with you on that. I've found it.
Are you doing it? Are you?
I do it all the time. I was working at home yesterday and I did it. I went and just lay on the bed.
Yeah.
Not for the whole afternoon. I wish it wasn't. But yeah, sorry. I just had the day off. Like, no, just mean like I'd gone upstairs to like do something. I just thought, what, I'm just gonna have 10 minutes to just lay on the bed, and I didn't. No telly, didn't read. Just lay there.
Yeah.
And just processed like, right, what am I gonna do this afternoon? Got to do that. I've got to pick the kids up from school. I've got to go to the swimming lesson tonight. Right. What can I do? What's on my to-do list? What can I get done? And then when it just puts you in a much better place to go and smash out a whole load of stuff and just be productive.
100%. I think you said it. There's it just helps to untangle all these things and just, I think I'm trying to encourage my son to do it as well. Just because he's got a lot going on as well, and it's just. I think it sets you up right. Just 15, 20 minutes in the morning or even at lunchtime, just to have that sort of break point between morning and PM, just reset.
Do you? One of the things because I think people go, "What do you do? What do you think about? And what do you have to do?" And I don't think there's a right and wrong for that. But
no,
one of the things I love doing, I can almost tell you exactly what's in my diary for the next week.
Right.
I don't mean to the exact minute, but I just mean I'll sit. And I'll think about, right, what am I doing today? I've got that meeting at 10 o'clock, and how do I want that to go? And have you prepared? And how do you feel about that? And then I've got this meeting here, and how do you feel about that? And then I've got to do that. And then I almost say to myself, right, do you reckon you can do that today? And I'm like, yeah, let's go do it.
Yeah.
And I find that quite a lot better than like, right, I'm really stressed. I've got up late, and I've got to get the kids out the door, and I've got to iron school uniforms. I've got to get to work, and I'm really got a load of road rage. And now I'm like, what am I doing? Like, yeah. That would have been old me.
So it just helps you organise your thoughts, and
I think so. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm perfect, but it certainly means I'm, like you said, I'm hopefully more calm.
Yeah, and are you doing it regular? Are you doing it daily or?
Yeah, I've got all the time. Yeah, daily. Yeah.
Do you do it at a certain time or just whenever you?
I think I'll do it before I get to bed, and then when I wake up in the morning. A big thing for me I've done is I made a big change. 12 months ago. I don't have my phone in my room.
Right.
I'd keep it downstairs. Once I've completed my, let's call it like correspondence. A bit like in Shakespeare times, you'd like sit with a quill and have like correspondence time. And a bit like that. I'll if I don't want to go on WhatsApp, I won't go on. I'll turn my emails off throughout the day. I'm like, if it's really important, ring me. If like the office is burning down or about to go bust, like definitely ring me. But there's nothing that can't keep. If I'm doing a task, I don't need the phone. I don't need email distracting me. I need to concentrate on that task and execute it as well to the best of my ability, and then that'll make me feel good. And I just don't watch. I don't have social media, and I don't watch the news. So I don't mean that really flippantly. Like I don't. I do care what's happening to people in the world, but if I can't control it,
yes,
then things I can control is like if I go I'm not a religious person, but if I go in a church and watch like the kids play,
yeah,
I can control that. I can give them a fiver in their church box. I'm
yeah,
lucky I can do that. I'm lucky to be able to do that. But I can't go and fix Ukraine, sadly.
yeah,
So
yeah,
why do I need an endless ream of information about it? Why don't I just try and control what I can control and try and be nice, be nice to the immediate things I can control? And that's helped me a lot. That's really made me feel
So you're making
more relaxed.
you're making a difference and focusing on the things that are within your sphere of influence, which that in itself is a good mentality. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty disciplined if you can stick to the not looking at
I've
stuff on social
got a
media.
cheat code, John. I've got German DNA, haven't I? So
Right.
using a huge stereotype, like organization, discipline, and routine is like wunderbar, like love it. So cheating a little bit, but yeah.
It's in the blood. It's in the genes.
There's a book actually. I think what's it called? It's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's a kind of like a history. It's called something like. It only came out a couple of years ago. It's something like why the Germans are better. Why Germans do things better or something like that.
Right.
But it's like a look. It looks over history of like, why they're as a race of people is again it's very stereotypical, but why they're just very effective at being organized, well drilled, planned, and all that stuff. It's cool. It's a dead easy read. It's only about 200 pages. A little bit tongue in cheek.
Is there an answer? Is there a reason?
I can't remember, but it was just 200 pages of me just going, yes, exactly, yes, right. Totally agree, yes, yeah.
So if you're German, are you like how far back do you go to?
Quite a while. So I did it over Christmas. I researched it. It's like 18th century or something like that. We were right. Descendants from Hanover. So I was kind of hoping, that royal family thing. Like if you watch The Crown on Netflix, and there's that link, isn't there, to Germany and Hanover and stuff. So I'm doing all this research. I'm like, oh please, like maybe there's a chance. I'm like, I'm like an heir to Buckingham Palace, but no. So it's something to do with that royalty. Military.
Yeah, I've always felt I was royalty.
Yeah. I've got one last question for you. Actually, I wanted to ask you what are the plans for Slingshot Edge?
Yeah.
Who should reach out to you? What sort of people, or people that perhaps will listen to this?
Yeah.
How do people get hold of you?
Yep. I guess plans. Then just to start with that one, what are the plans for Slingshot Edge? So at the moment, we are digitizing our content. So putting our workshops and training online. So traditionally, we've been really focused on the B2B space. So CROs, sales leaders, business leaders would bring us in to upskill their teams, and it's been B2B teams sort of focus. So at the moment, we're building all of our trainings and content and putting that into an online portal so that you can self-serve, if you like. And I guess part of that is shifting from B2B, or not moving away from B2B, but moving into B2C as well. So as an individual, you could come on and consume the content and subscribe, or buy some micro type courses based on what you want to focus on, whether it's how to discover or how to shape an influence, or even just to get a founding and first principles around the chimp. So definitely a big move into that space. We're filming a lot of that stuff right now. So that should be out there, if you like, as part of a website relaunch that we're doing as well in the next month or two.
Cool, that's exciting.
That'd be good, yeah. And we're also thinking about how do we continue to put out useful content. So we've got a big effort on this year to keep producing content for things like LinkedIn. We're going to launch a newsletter as well in the next week or two. We're looking at some collaborations with some other, I would say, big names in the sales training world, and looking how we can collaborate and jointly contribute to each other's newsletters and start to build the lists up that way as well. Other thing that we've got one eye on, I think most companies in the world have got an eye on this right now, is GPT, ChatGPT.
Okay.
Because I think it's a game changer, right? ChatGPT is going to be, or GPT-4 as it is right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I don't know what the right answer is, but I know the wrong answer, and the wrong answer is to ignore it.
Right.
I don't know. Have you looked at it at all?
Yeah. I've got quite a deep thought on this sort of stuff,
Right.
which is, in a world where everybody's, and it's dead important, mental health and all this stuff, we take away that creative part of your brain that's going, please exercise me. Like all the different parts of your brain needs exercise, doesn't it? Just like you would with a dog, right? And we're taking away that part potentially and expecting people to still feel really well.
I agree.
I'm kind of like, there's elements of it that I love it because I love progression and technology, progressive and all that stuff. But at the same time, I'm a little bit like, do we know where we're going with this tech? Are we sure we're going down the right path? What are the problems potentially?
I agree, 100%. There is a concern, right? There was something, I can't remember where I saw it. It was someone. It was an example of how things change, right? Someone, they asked their grandfather, what's 25 times 42, and he went, okay, and he came up with the answer. Then they asked a 25-year-old, 30-year-old, and they were like, iPhone, calculator. And it just shows that when automation starts to do the job for you, you as you say, you're not exercising your brain in the same way. You're losing something there. So I think it's inevitable. There's not a turning back point here. It's the dam has burst, well and truly burst.
Yeah.
I think people, I would encourage people to start thinking about how they become programmers or prompters of GPT-4. So it's still going to require input and deep thought to get the most out of it. And I've started to dabble and just look at how we could potentially use that to not remove our brain power, but just to support what we do. So, role play is a massive thing in selling, right? Sorry, James, we're going to let this dog out as well.
Oh, no worries.
So, role play is a huge thing in selling. You're not going to get better unless you role play. You've got to build a muscle memory and start building patterns and all that sort of stuff. And it looks to me that that's something that might help with role play. If you get this programmed in the right way, you could, and cleverly programmed, at some point sellers can role play and interact with this stuff, and they can start building that muscle memory up, and you can scale that, right? Because we run role plays at the moment in our workshops, and you're constrained. You can only role play with who's there, and you've got to,
exactly, yeah.
But if you program GPT, then I think that could do that. I think there is a concern though around the top of the funnel, and anything that or anyone that's involved in generating outbound messaging, then I would be thinking about how you make yourself relevant going forward. And again, maybe part of that is to become an expert at programming the AI.
It's so funny, isn't it? I've just given a proper loss aversion answer, which is, here's a real negative reason, and your answer is actually look at it as a positive thing. It's just on the convo we've had. It's really interesting that I looked at it that way immediately, and you pointed out a way that actually here's a great opportunity. There could be a whole bunch of programmers or careers for people in this line that we've not had before.
100%. It's going to spawn up an industry, because at the end of the day, it's going to be, what you get out of it. And I've played about with that a little bit. Is the output is hugely dependent on the prompts and the frameworks and information that you give it. And if you get that right, you can get some really good stuff. So if you can, you're still going to have human beings there, like prompting it and programming it. So there's going to be a whole industry that spawns out of that. All I would say is don't ignore it. I don't think, don't ignore it. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I know that ignoring it's probably not the best bit. But I have got the same concerns as you. I think there's a fear that 10 years down the line, are we less intelligent or more intelligent across the board as a species? right? There's always going to be people that rise to the top and capitalize on these things. But are we, as a species, more intelligent in 10 years or less intelligent, or better thinkers or worse thinkers?
Have you seen the latest series of South Park? Can you imagine you're somebody that probably over the years has probably watched. I imagine you've probably watched South Parks, right? So I've not watched it for years and years and years, but they've done one where they really put the boot in on Meghan Markle and what's his name, Prince? I can't remember, Harry.
Yeah.
So watch that if you want a laugh over the weekend. Very tongue in cheek. But they've also done one for ChatGPT, and basically the plot is all the boys start using it to find ways of messaging their girlfriends, really affectionate, nice messages, and the girls are like, oh, this is lovely, I can't believe, you feel like so connected and you understand me so well. And of course the problem is by the end the boys can't even talk.
That's right.
They can't even talk to the girls, right? So it's like classic, like they've nailed it, like totally nailed it. So it's like it's the way that they've
the technology has basically replaced all of your thinking and cognitive power. But I think there's definitely opportunities there for people to think about how, how it improves, how they can get involved on the programming prompting side and start to use that and create clever outbound sequencing. But you're still inputting some stuff there. Our customers create stories, right? And they come to us and we help them do that. And, GBT is a framework that you can use. Again, if you prompt it and program it in the right way, it can produce some good content as well. But I'm interested on the role-playing side. I think if there's a way to scale role-playing in a way that sellers can regularly role-play without being reliant on other human beings to do that, then that sort of interests me, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get intuitively better in anything that you do, or intuitively better, more skillful, unless you're practicing. And if there's, I haven't spoken about role play much today, but I would encourage sellers to role play, even if it's with themselves. Just to imagine the conversations they're going to have. And but I think certainly GBT is interesting from that perspective.
Well, it brings you around nicely, doesn't it? Because he talked about it kind of at the top of the conversation. That was one of the things we talked about with the training element. People that can be really well trained or product trained, but one of the things they might not have is the right behaviors or the right coaching. And the example of role play is if you had something that you could, just like you might have same way physical fitness access to a gym, and you can go and fine tune your technique, or go and they said the tennis player, if he's got a machine that helps him serve or her serve, then it's up to you to go use it. So if you can orchestrate this technology to help people do that, if people want to become a top salesperson, go use it, go practice. It's going to make you better.
100%. I was sort of playing about with it just myself, just sort of saying, look, can we role play? And I was going, yeah, we can role play. I went, okay. He says, what can role play? I said, well, I'll be a seller, you be a buyer. Okay, what are you selling? Sales training. All right, sales training is interesting, right? So it's strange because it's actually you're having a conversation, or it feels like you're having a conversation, because its grasp of language and semantics is so advanced. But yeah, I think it's early days for us, but certainly something we're looking at, because I think going back to the point of role playing, building the muscle memory, you don't get better at this unless you're doing that. I can give you the manual. I can say, look, this is what you should be doing. I can even tell you how to do it and break it down. But unless you're actually building that muscle memory, then you don't get better. You're not going to intuitively get better and become situationally fluent. I don't know. Did you ever watch that thing on Netflix? It's the Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
Right, brilliant.
Loved it.
So for those that haven't watched it, it's this sort of young female chess prodigy who quickly rises through the ranks, and she's fantastic. And I don't know if you remember at night when she's like quite a young girl, she's lying in bed.
You can see the moves on the wall.
Yeah, sort of playing the chessboard on the ceiling. And she's imagining the opponent opening in different ways. And then she's running through a series of moves and what they might do and how she might counter that. And she does that for different openings and different chess setups. And she goes over and over and over and over and over. And what she's doing there, she's just programming these patterns into her brain. And she's thinking about it deeply. Well, if they do that, how would I respond? If I respond that way, how would they counter? And she's playing these patterns and sequences. so that when she does actually go in and play chess, it's intuitive, right? It's programmed into the chimp. That, the chimp sort of recognizes patterns, and it's tuned and it's programmed in there. So in the heat of the moment, when she sees a move, there's an intuition, there's a gut feel as to what the right move is.
And the chimp isn't all excited, because the chimp knows you're keeping your chimp relaxed, right? Because it knows the pattern of play.
Yeah, and I talk about the chimp there, but if you read Daniel Kahneman's stuff, he talks about system one, the fast thinking.
Okay, yeah.
Fast thinking part of your brain. And, when we talk about the chimp, we're kind of talking about Daniel Kahneman's system one as well. And that part of the brain where you program patterns. And Kahneman talks about intuition and gut feel. He says, what is intuition and gut feel? And his theory, or part of the theory, is it's intuition and gut feel is just your unconscious brain recognizing a pattern. It's seen it before. So, for an example is he talks about in the book is firefighters in a burning house, and something tells them, it's the chimp, to get out, and they run out the building just at the last minute. The floor collapses.
Falls down, yeah.
And he says that intuition, that gut feel, is just the chimp, or the system one, recognizing something at an unconscious level, maybe a change in temperature, sudden change in temperature, a noise that was, you didn't consciously hear, some little pattern that said, this is danger, get out there. And so, like in the chess example, when you program the chimp with all these patterns, in the heat of the moment, it intuitively feels a strong play. But it's not guessing. It's not just. It's based on it's pattern recognition, And the analogy to sellers is, if you practice the conversation, you practice that discovery conversation, bearing in mind that not all buyers turn up the same way. Some are open, some are guarded, some have inbound, some are on the back of outbound. But if you role play the conversation and you understand what you're trying to do in that conversation, trying to discover information, trying to shape and influence, and trying to position, if you practice these things over and over in different ways, you're more likely in the heat of the conversation in real life to do the right thing intuitively, to be more situationally fluent, to be more adaptive.
It's that instinct, isn't it? Using
yeah.
It's
the muscle memory's there, and it goes back to what you said at the start of the call. Behavior, changing behavior. You only change behavior if you replace old habits with new habits, and you don't do that by chance. It's got to take conscious effort. You've got to consciously want to change it, and then commit to putting the hours in to change. It's like the you and we phrasing, right? If you listen to calls and conversations, it sounds like such a small thing to do is to change the language from, we can do this, we can help you, we can provide that, to, you can do that, you can enable these things, you can achieve these outcomes. It's a simple thing, right, in principle, but it's bloody hard to do. And if you listen to conversations and human beings talking, even though they're aware that we phrasing, and that data is clear on that as well, the more that you we all over your prospect, the less deals you lose, right? Change it to you, empower them, you'll win more deals. Chris Voss talks about it. I understand that, I get the concept, and even though I understand it, it's or people understand it, it's very hard for them not to just slip into the default habit unless they consciously try. And it's all about building that new habit. So
it's all about wanting to get better, isn't it? Like it would be as a sports person. Like you said right at the start, the tennis player.
Yeah, if you don't want to get better, if you're not motivated to change, you won't change, right? You've got to be motivated, and then you've got to be consciously aware of what it is you're trying to change. So you go through a sort of awkward, consciously incompetent phase, and then you get consciously competent because you've practiced and practiced and practiced, and then the goal is you become consciously or sort of unconsciously competent, where you've now established a new habit, a new way of talking. You've sort of eradicated the we's, and it's all your default positions, you phrasing. But it's through, as you say, the want to do it, and then the actual effort, and putting the hard hours in as well.
Awesome. Well, I've absolutely loved this, John. So I want to thank you for taking your time to share so much of your inspiration and knowledge with us.
Good chat. Hopefully there's some things there that people can take. It was we've covered quite a lot, so
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time. Let
No
me try and
worries.
figure out how I stop this now.
Oh yeah, you wanted you asked me how people can find us.
Yeah, I did. How do we do that?
So check out the website www.slingshotedge.com or LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn.
And your videos on LinkedIn, if people haven't seen them, that they're ace. They're done really, really well. And
Yeah,
and you people understand if you've not seen them when they go look at them. You kind of do. I want to say like acting, but it's the kind of like it's not tongue in cheek, but you know it like like the best bad actor in the world is how that's the bit on the strapline on like the movie poster,
Yeah, no offense taken. That's fine.
Awesome. Right. Thank you for your time,
man.
John.
All right. Take care, James. Cheers.
See you soon. Bye.
Ta.